Well, I'll be really sincere. We actually serve clients who will tell us their spouse, the healthy one, the partner will say, don't talk about death with them. They don't know they're dying. And the ill person will say to the volunteer, oh, don't tell my partner, don't tell my spouse, but I know I'm dying.
Yep.
And my staff is stuck because they've entered the home, the situation that they've been called to, saying, what am I going to say? Where am I from? Like, I'm from Hospice of Waterloo Region. This is the work we do.
Sheli and Mark, thank you so much for giving me a chance to speak with you today. I'd like to start us off with you each saying a little bit about what you do, describe your role in relation to end-of-life care a little bit, and then we can go on to ask some other questions, talk about some other things.
Okay.
Sure.
So you're with hospice a little bit more recently?
Last 5 years. Before that, I worked in the community for about 30 years, working mostly with older adults, and definitely within the focus of community development. I have a background in community development and spent years developing programs and services, working with the broad healthcare system in the community to make things move forward for older adults. And I would say the two things I learned about my work along the way were, one, it's about community. It's really all about community, and the healthcare system has forgotten that. So, and the best things happen through collaboration. I'm a very task-oriented person, but the best work I do is when I collaborate with other people. And the other thing that I've learned, which led me to hospice, was that we forget to ask the individual what they want. We become a system that just does and tells. And all through my career, excuse me, one of the things I would say, the healthcare system was always saying to me, oh, Mrs. Smith needs to do that, Mr. Jones needs to do that. And I learned, well, what do they want? What does Mr. Jones want? What does Mrs. Smith say she wants? And that person-centered care is what brought me to hospice. It's a beautiful thing to be in a hospice and see the way the volunteers and the staff wrap around that individual for what they want, what quality of life is for them. That's why I'm here.
Awesome. Great. And Mark, how about yourself?
I've been here 6 years. I came from education, where I was a school administrator for about 23 years, elementary school. And I have to say that I find this work to be, it brings about passion, and there's just something about the work at hospice that is really meaningful. Even though my work in education was similar, working with children. I came to hospice a little bit differently because I'm not a social worker, having been an educator. My last school was very large, and I experienced quite a bit of death in the school setting. I had a teacher who died. I had 2 children, a kindergarten who died of leukemia, and a senior student in 8th grade who died of a cancer, and parents, of course, who die because it was such a large school. It mimicked a community. There were 780 children. And I really reflected, being the principal, I had to journey with the school community through those losses. And so by the end of 5 years, I'd seen quite a bit, and really realized how that affects a community and how you have to walk with people when that happens. You don't just, it's not just an administrative task. And so when I retired, I was invited to do a little bit of work here. And there's an ongoing joke around hospice that you never do a little bit of work. You stay. You arrive and you stay. And so that's how I ended up managing the whole hospice community team. It's interesting.
Yeah, can I come back to something he said? Just him talking about the school experience and having to walk with people. That's why I'm here, because I was shocked when I started working here to realize that people didn't understand the value of hospice. And I think a big part of that is because we've learned, or we've moved away from walking with people through their journey. So my work is more along the lines of trying to get people to open up, to acknowledge that death is coming to everyone, but also to look at how they can support people. So not going into the grocery store and seeing Mrs. Jones, who's just lost her husband, and going down a different aisle because I don't know what to say to her. Not talking with the child out on the playground who's lost a family member, because that's the job of the social worker, to really try to get people back to owning and taking responsibility for our role in supporting people. And so what's beautiful about the staff here and the volunteers here is that they get that. They are prepared and passionate about being that support to people.
Why might it be the case that people have lost that sense of walking with people? Is that something that we sort of used to have but have lost? What are the reasons why people aren't very good at that, or why are we tending not to do that in your perspective, either of? I
was sharing a story recently with Shelley. I really believe we used to have it, and I shared the story of my grandmother. So my grandmother was born in 1890, and I had the privilege of really knowing her as a child, because she lived till she was 98. So I knew her until I was a young adult. She died 30 years ago, and so just before Sherry and I were married. And as a child, because we lived in a small town, and we lived really close by in a small town, I had the privilege, I used to accompany her on her visits, she would call them. So she was the youngest of 13 siblings. And her role became, as her siblings declined, I recall her cooking in her very large kitchen, because she herself had 12 kids, and she lived she had a 7-bedroom house. She would cook these elaborate meals, and she would prepare a picnic basket. And I was the grandchild that she would call upon. She would put on her coat and always a hat. I said she never went anywhere without a hat, because it was that generation in the 50s and 60s, 70s that didn't go anywhere without wearing a hat. She would put on her hat with a hat pin, and I would carry the picnic basket, and we would go to these siblings' houses who were approaching end of life, and she would deliver a fully cooked meal to these homes, and like Uncle Arthur, Aunt Edna, and she would put it out on the table and take care of these people to end of life. She did that for everyone. That was an experience that I came to understand. I have to share with you that I'm in a book study, and recently we were talking about our 5 senses and how they relate to end of life. And the 2 senses that I relate to the most about end of life are sight and smell. And with smell, what I relate to is the smell of food, and the smell, not unpleasant, of going into these homes, and of each home having its own, these were people's homes, and of taking care of people. And so I was a little guy, because I was never tall, and I would carry this big basket, and we would do this on every 2 weeks, go to somebody's house and take care of them. And she did this into her 80s, and so that was something you did. And you talked about death, because she would talk about, Arthur's declining, Arthur's going to die, he's getting closer. Interestingly, that kind of talk skipped a generation. Mm-hmm. My parents, who are alive today, 89 and 91, do not speak that way. They have their power of attorney, they have their will, they have all that stuff prepared. They don't want to talk about it.
And I think that with Dr. Mannix, who wrote the book that Mark's talking about, she said the other day we were listening to her, she said, death got kidnapped in the 40s into the healthcare system, that we went from grandma delivering to you're not feeling well, you need to go to hospital. And I was thinking about what she said the other day, and I thought there's such a stigma around talking about death, but I also wonder if there's even bigger stigma about failure, and that somehow in the healthcare system, as it took over taking care of people till they died, it became a failure to let people die. And I think that that's come into our thinking. So your mom, my mom, won't talk about it because talking about death means you're accepting failure, that it's going to be over. And that's a huge mountain to overcome with the general public.
You think about dying and the dying process being taken over by the medical system and the health system in this way. And you kind of wonder why that was the case. And to me, what jumps into my mind when I try to think about that is the fact that people, there were a lot of medical advances around the 1940s in particular, 1940s and afterwards, World War II, post-World War II. And I think that's maybe when it really started to get this sense that people had, hey, I'm getting sick, but I really might be able to get better because there's all these amazing things, right? And so we don't want to lose hope. We're hoping that we're going to be able to keep going, and we don't want to admit that we're going to die. And then you see that kind of proliferating forward into our current day, where there's almost this expectation that whatever's going wrong with you, the doctors are going to fix it for you. There's going to be a way to fix it. And then when you come across cases, which, it's kind of a 100% of us die in the end, right? Which is something that we don't seem to realize. But when you come up to a situation where we can't fix you, and it's almost like a shock. It's almost like an anomaly. What? You can't, there's nothing you can do? And the doctors seem to want to keep trying to do something. And then, we don't have any recognized therapy to help you, but maybe we could put you in some kind of experimental thing because maybe there's a shot there. And people kind of keep hoping that there will be some way to
beat it,
yeah,
to succeed.
And so we're not prepared at all for the situation which we're all going to have to face at some point, where something's going to happen that we can't beat.
Right, and I think that the other thing that's happening is that we're living longer, but we're living longer with disease and illness. So there is more time. The number of people, it's a very small percentage of people who actually die suddenly. So we have all this time, and we're not taking advantage of it. We're not using that to support each other because of that stigma or whatever. Oh, no, I'm not giving up. I'm not going to fail here. I'm going to beat this disease. That kind of language just proliferates the whole thing around the not talk about death. And we have an opportunity, and Alan Kelleher, you've heard him talk about the fact that you're living longer with these diseases. You're spending less than 10% of your time with the healthcare person. The rest of the time, you're with family, you're with friends, you're in the workplace, you're in front of your laptop, you're with your pets. We have 95% of our time, we're with the people that we love and are friends with and work with, and yet we're not talking about it.
We're not talking about it, and so we don't really know what to do with.
We don't know what to do. Yes, that's a very important point, and I want to come back to that in a moment, but I want to ask Sheli. Sheli, what's a quote you've had over your desk for a while? And I love that quote. You don't need a hospital, you don't need a doctor.
This other one about it's not a medical issue, it's a human issue, it's a social issue.
Yes, it's not a medical issue, it's a human issue, it's a social issue to die.
Yeah.
You don't need a whole medical team. You certainly want to take advantage of pain and symptom management, what's available to us in modern day, but you don't need a whole team. You need the people who love you to be around you.
Yeah, and as I said to you, it's not an either or.
No.
It's a together.
It's a
back
together.
to that collaboration around how we support each other.
Yeah, and we've separated it out, and there's a sadness to that, because by not talking about it, so many of the Well, I'll be really sincere. We actually serve clients who will tell us their spouse, the healthy one, the partner will say, don't talk about death with them. They don't know they're dying. And the ill person will say to the volunteer, oh, don't tell my partner, don't tell my spouse, but I know I'm dying.
And the whole situation is going on that these are hospice volunteers that you're talking with, but don't.
Yep.
And my staff is stuck because they've entered the home, the situation that they've been called to, saying, what am I going to say? Where am I from? Like, I'm from Hospice of Waterloo Region. This is the work we do. And it's very awkward to be serving and to be providing this service, but nobody wants to say the word. And they're missing out on really valuable time. This is the time to have the conversations, to have the end of life conversations, to talk about what was meaningful, what were the vacations, what were the moments, what were the treasured memories, maybe what are the forgivenesses, what are the sorrows that the person wants to share. And people, they don't want to go there. They want to talk about, oh, maybe this drug, maybe this will do the trick. That's very common.
Mark, that resonates so much with me, that sense of before you die, what is there left to do? What work is there left to do? And how could that time that you have left be made the most meaningful that it can be? And I've been reading different books from hospice care providers, hospice nurses, different people doing hospice work, and that's one of the things that touches me the most, is when I read about stories about the way that families are able to make that time extremely special, and to give each other sort of last gifts, and to reconcile, to do hopes, to fulfill remaining hopes, or it seems to me like there's a lot left to still do. And if we never get to the point of sort of saying, okay, this person's dying now, we need to go into this mode of walking with them as they're dying. We never get to that point. And even right before, a couple days before they die, you're still in this mode of, well, we need to try this, or maybe the doctors can do this, or we're going to run some more tests to try this. Right up to the point where now the person, there's nothing left. And now there's nothing left to do but to make the person comfortable while they die. But you didn't have that opportunity to have those conversations, to unpack. Anyway, that just resonates with me a lot. And it resonates with me personally because my own father passed away in February. And one of the big struggles that we had was the fact we never got a final diagnosis of what was actually wrong with him. And right up until, I would say, almost like 24 hours before he died, the doctors were still coming in and saying, well, we could try this, or we want to try this test to make sure that it's not this. And I think my dad was just at the point of like, this is just, they can't help me anymore, but they keep trying to do things. And I don't want this. But if we had been able to recognize that, a month earlier or 2 months earlier, when really it was probably pretty obvious that he was dying. But, we're just holding on to, but hopefully maybe something will come up and he'll get better. And so nobody shifts into that mode of like, okay, he's dying. We're going to lose him. What can we do with the time that we have left, right?
And it is a shift. It's a very significant shift. And it becomes a quality that people who have that gift, because it becomes a gift, in their grief and their bereavement, we note that they heal and they move forward in a different way. Everyone grieves, everyone is bereaved, but it's different because they then have memories that they take with them that occurred in that time. It's already happening, you see. While those folks who weren't allowed that preparation time are
trauma.
they're still seeking it.
Yeah,
it's
trauma.
complicated.
Yeah.
They're still seeking it. Yeah. And so in some ways, they're robbed. Yeah. They're robbed of that experience. And that's a Catherine Mannix book where she prepares families by explaining to them what's going to happen. And so the families then know, oh, so this is going to happen. Okay, thank you. Because now we know what to expect, and now we can journey with the person we love. And that can become I want to say celebration, and I don't mean that in a trite way, but it can become a time to really just live. And those are the most graceful stories we have with our volunteers and the families we serve. And the people that struggle are those that they're not given that opportunity.
It's almost it's the celebrating, it's the living until you die. That if you don't acknowledge, accept that elephant in the room, you're just focused on the end. Whereas if you can address it, then all those experiences happen from that on are about living. And those are the living memories you have, rather than the trauma of the not having had it and having to just focus on death.
Yep. And that, as I hear us, the three of us, speak about it, I think for people who don't talk about this, I think this is so foreign. It's like an oxymoron. It's like, what are they talking about? But if they could enter into the conversation, it's the people, Rose Chat's book, Can't We Talk About Something More Pleasant? If they could understand, this isn't unpleasant. This actually contributes to the richness of your family, to be able to say, when the time comes, this is who I am, this is who I was, this is what I want you to remember me for, and this is what I want.
Yeah. And
then the family can go, oh, and we've got it backwards.
Yeah.
But your earliest question was, when did this happen? It happened in the 20th century, about mid-century, when we gave it up. We were like,
take away the responsibility.
Yeah,
I don't want to be part of this.
It's like,
yeah, because I'm thinking back to your story about your grandmother, and it sounds like she just had this sense. Mm-hmm. This is this person's time. We can tell what's going on. We know. And so we're going to start taking some steps to do that. We're going to involve our grandchildren. We're going to get other people involved. We're going to bring over some food. We're going to meet with them. We're going to start to support and do some of the things that are needed to journey with that person.
She never gave it up.
It was part of life.
The next generation gave it up.
And doesn't want to go there.
And doesn't want to
go there.
And I really believe our generation has to revisit it and recapture it, because, like everything else, we've got to get back to it.
I guess a part of what we could try to talk about is, how do we do that? I mean, how do we recapture that ability to face the reality that people die, and to prepare for that, and to mobilize ourselves to be ready when our loved ones are reaching that stage, or when our neighbors or our friends, our coworkers are reaching that stage or facing that? How do we get to that point? I mean, Sheli, you talk a lot about, we have to have conversations. Just how do we even get people to start having conversations about this? And of course, that's got to be a big part of it. But I'm kind of wondering, how do we, unless you go through it yourself, like just in my own case with my father, I just want to, that is hugely motivating to me, because I see how this could have been different. And I do want to say, we got a palliative care doctor involved, and I'm so thankful that we did. But if we hadn't asked for that, it wouldn't have happened. But when we got the palliative care doctor, and then we could start kind of having some conversations, and we had my dad moved up to a palliative suite in the hospital, where then we could bring in some of our relatives, and my mother could have some interactions with my dad that were really meaningful. But I'm like, if we hadn't pushed for that, even that measure of what we were able to have at the end wouldn't have happened.
I know, and as you're talking about, so when I came here and started looking at and seeing, okay, we got a problem. People are not referring to hospice because they don't want to talk about death. People are referring late because they want to beat it, and they're only giving up and then referring to hospice. We got a real problem with people looking at death and accepting it as part of life. And so my first thought, okay, we got to do lots of education. But you can't get people to do education if they don't want to, if they're not interested in the topic. If they're, and I said to you, I laughed about it before. We set up a display about hospice. People make a wide circle around it. They don't go anywhere near it. I'm at a dinner party. People ask me what I do, where I work. End of conversation. So we have a long way to go. So what we landed on is that we really need to just try and get people to open up the conversation. And we're not the only ones trying to do it. There are death cafes that started in the UK. There's film series that you and I have done together. I do believe that it's inching forward. I mean, we have years and years and years to get over where the medical system is taken over. The community has to take it back. We have to get the community to be, when you think about men in the labor room, that didn't come from them. The doctors didn't say, I think it's time for your husband to be here when you're having a baby. No, the husband said, and the wives said, no.
Yeah, I was thinking it might have been started with the wives.
Yeah.
And then the husbands were like, okay, yeah.
Yeah, and you think about the midwives.
Yeah.
We have made birth a community thing. It's not just the medical people who help with birthing. So why aren't we doing that with death? But to get there, we have to acknowledge death.
I wonder if a big part of the difficulty that people have being willing to get into the mode of supporting each other at the end of life is just this inability to even really make sense of death, or what is death? How does death fit together with life? And it seems like you go through life and nothing is about death. We're not really thinking about that. If we think about anything about the future, it's like we're going to get to this great retirement and it's going to be awesome and we're going to live a whole bunch more great experiences because by that time our kids won't be bugging us anymore and we'll be having lots of fun. But like death, it's like, what is that? Is that just like annihilation? Like you just blank out and that's it? Like, how do we even think about that? Anyway, I just wonder if that's part of the reason why. Just that we don't really have a framework of meaning.
Yeah, it really is. What you're asking is right on, and I think like that's essential to that death-denying culture, and yet we are a very death-focused culture. So it's both, eh? Right, yeah. I mean, media, movies, it's all death. Like but it's zombies, but it's not real. Yeah. And most people who will tell you who are at a death will tell you it's very peaceful. Like doctors, nurses, our volunteers, family members will say it is very peaceful. Very, very few deaths are actually trauma. What you see on TV, the CPR and the beep, beep, beep and the crash and all that's on television. That's those silly shows that portray things, and that's not how it happens. It's a last breath and the failure to exhale.
It's also fear. I think fear is huge in this. I'm coming back to that whole thing about failure. Yeah. But I also think there's fear, and it's like you said, people don't know what death is. They have all this stuff on TV and all this inaccuracy, and once they understand it as peaceful, it's not quite so fearful. But people don't want to go there because it's scary. And that comes back to what you said about where's the foundation in terms of what we believe. We've lost it. It's a blank slate. It's no longer, there's nothing there. And
that when you think of our culture, that's around spirituality. And I think of Reginald Bibby and all the work he does around Canadians and spirituality and religion, and needing to separate out religion and spirituality. Most people will say they've got spirituality hardly anybody has religion anymore. I think Canadians are down to about 35% that claim any religion.
And yet they almost all are open to some kind of spirituality, spiritual person, meaning-making stuff. And how do we fit death into that conversation, into that framework of where people are at?
So it needs a reconfiguration, a retooling, a spirituality that is fuller, so that people understand. Like, I often get confused when I talk to people and death is such a foreign concept to them, and I think, but you accept that birth is. And so how is it that you don't get the death piece? Because they're bookends. Like, you're born, you die. And really, the moment you were born, you're starting to journey. You're starting. At the moment of birth, you're starting.
I think it comes back to what you said earlier, too, though. The medical system demonstrated that they can save people. Your grandmother, and her 13 siblings, they saw it, that eventually, this person's going to get sick, and the doctor would come to the house and say, yeah, the person's got whatever, and, maybe tomorrow or the next day. And that was accepted. And then we take them to hospital, and they have what they thought was an incurable disease, and like you were talking about your dad, they try all these things with, okay, we might be able to fix this. We might be able to save that person so they don't die.
If this hospital can't, then maybe there's some other magical hospital somewhere where some kind of a wizard doctor can pull this off somehow, right?
What I find discouraging and disappointing is that we get so focused on curing and trying this thing and this thing and this thing, and the beauty of that time together is lost. Because you're going down the hallway to have one more surgery or one more, and you lose that beauty.
Yeah, I think that really is a core tragedy of what's going on, and really good to start thinking about how might we try to address that. And it's so good to know that you're on that, Sheli and Mark, and the work that you're doing. Yeah, I mean, I want to be in on that too in some way. So I think we probably are going to have to come back and have another conversation sometime, or get some volunteers if you're willing to. I mean, I so much appreciate your time today and for taking this time to talk. Do you have any sort of last concluding thought on this? If you thought about, say, someone who's an undergrad student today, what would be one parting thing that you'd want them to know about, or to think about in the area of end-of-life care? What are the challenges? What can we be doing? What do we need to be doing?
The first thought that comes to me is be brave. Start talking. Just open it up. Yep, people may walk away from you. They may avoid you in the grocery store aisle, but just be brave and talk. That would be That's good. What you would add, Mark.
I keep thinking, and I think it's attributed to Cicely Saunders, though I'm not sure, that a death well planned is a life well lived.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's so important, because I think then what you do is you gift the people you love with what you planned.
And when you're talking planning, you're talking talk. You're talking conversation.
I'm talking conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much, and thanks for this hospitality, opening up the Hospice Waterloo Region site here in Kitchener. And all the best to both of you, and hope we can keep talking as we go forward. Yeah, we'll do. We'll be happy. Then I'll end up staying, right? Because that's what happens.